Have you ever picked up a hitchhiker? I've picked up numerous hitchhikers, but one in particular stands out. His name was Garth. Garth was a hella dude with a hell of a story. This is the encounter between my friends and Garth. After graduating high school, myself and four friends decided to take a long road trip over the summer, and Glacier National Park was our mecca for the trip. We found ourselves camping in the middle of nowhere in the woods of northwest Montana, some 25 miles north of Missoula. We camped illegally and got drunk and stoned and pretty much stayed up all night. In the morning, I woke up in the driver's seat of my car to see some dude walking by in the road, which was 40 yards away from our campsite. The guy walking couldn't see us just passing by, but I could see him. I was still half drunk, so I decided to yell at him, not even thinking that it could be the owner of the land that we were illegally camping on. He did a 180 and stared straight at me and began walking towards me. He had a single backpack, a big tree limb for a walking stick, and looked exhausted and hungry. He looked like the Big Lebowski mixed with Saul from Pineapple Express, but acted like someone who had just had their ass kicked, mentally and physically. He looked like someone had sucked his soul out of him. My friends had heard me yelling for him, so they had stirred awake to find, to their surprise, Garth sitting in one of our lawn chairs eating our stale Doritos like he hadn't eaten anything in days. We would later learn that was actually true. It was about 10 a.m. by the time we decided to leave the campsite and head back to Missoula to find food. Garth hopped in the car and began to tell his story of how he ended up in the middle of nowhere, Montana. He sat shotgun and talked while my friend sat behind him, ready for Garth to try to kill us or something crazy. The story that Garth told us was f***ing crazy. It basically went something like this. Some dude he met in Missoula promised him some work on his land. Apparently, the guy bought some land and needed some trees and brush cleared, so he could start building a house. He said he would let Garth stay on his land for the night and meet him there in the morning, with some tools and some food, so they could work all day to clear this brush. Well, one day went by, then another, and another, and another. The guy never showed up and Garth was on this guy's land for 5 fucking days with no food or shelter. He luckily had a stream of water on his land that Garth drank to keep hydrated, but catching food was next to impossible. He said he could hear coyotes very close to him at night, and one morning he woke up to a bull moose 30 yards away from, snorting and stomping, its hooves on the ground, ready to charge. Garth ran up a tree and stayed there for the rest of the day. He said he didn't want to leave the land because he had no idea where he was, and he was hoping that the guy would show up to take him back to town. It wasn't until this particular morning that he said he was so hungry and cold that he thought he was going to die if he didn't start walking somewhere. Garth said he started following a logging road with the hope it would lead him somewhere. He had been walking all night with no signs of anything. He actually thought he was walking in circles. He said that the coyotes were howling and he was the most scared he had ever been in his life. We were the first sign of people he had seen in almost 6 days. After told us this story, we were said we wanted to buy him a lunch and some beers and a coat. He immediately declined. He seemed embarrassed by the situation, especially because some 18-year-olds were going to buy him this stuff. We understood where he was coming from, but this guy just had 6 days of hell in the woods and he deserved a hot meal. He finally said he would eat lunch with us, so we took him to a Chinese buffet where he ate down 4 fat plates, like a boss. After lunch, he asked us to take him to the homeless shelter in town so he could get a shower and get a bed for the night. We agreed and took him across town to drop him off. The car ride over was quiet, mainly because Garth dozed off, probably from his exhaustion. He was still sleeping when we got to the homeless shelter. We woke him up and he thanked us 1,000,000 times and stumbled into the shelter. My friends and I were floored by his story. We didn't say much as we hit the road north to Glacier National Park until we noticed something on the floor by the front seat. His fucking backpack. We were 40 miles north of town and didn't even think about what to do. We pulled over and turned around to take his backpack to him at the shelter. We contemplated opening it for a good 15 minutes. We thought it would be wrong and that we wouldn't want someone to do that to our pack. But our curiosity got the best of us and we decided to open it. Garth was too epic to not find out what he had in there to aid in his wilderness adventure. We joked about what would be in there: a bloody knife, a head, some sort of body part. What we found was truly unbelievable. We found out that Garth was bipolar and diabetic based on his medications. He had some oral glucose gel to combat his low blood sugar, a blood sugar machine, and Zoloft, antidepressant. It blew my mind that this man, a diabetic, would even think about staying in the woods for this long, while knowing he was a diabetic. We also found a notebook that had some sketches and writings, mainly about his travels around the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to read more, but we had reached the shelter to return his pack. Garth was a fucked man if I had ever met one. We thought he could use a little help, so we put $100 in his pack before we gave it back to him. He was inside sitting at a table when we arrived with his pack. I held out the pack and just said, "I think you forgot something, man." He stood up and ran over to me, grabbed it, and then gave me a huge bear hug and started crying. He told me, while he was hugging me, that he thought that he had just lost everything he owned after we dropped him off. It was weird, but I felt like I had to hug him back, so I did. He followed us back out to our car and thanked us again and offered us a cup of coffee. We declined and said we had to be on our way to get there before dark. He understood and even offered to take a look at our car's oil and other stuff before we headed out. We said no, said goodbye, and drove off to the corner. We were stuck at a traffic light and I could still see him in the rearview mirror, probably 50 to 60 yards behind us. He knelt down to dig through his backpack. He took out his glucometer, his notebook, and then the $100 we had put in there. He saw it and started running after us, either to thank us or to try to give it back. The light turned green and we drove off before he got to us. I stood out the car window, gave him a wave and a peace sign. He responded with a salute and the biggest smile I've ever seen. We drove off and we never saw him again. This was our encounter with Garth, the world's manliest hobo. Wherever you are, Garth, Godspeed, my good man. Yes, I did it once and I'll never do it again. I just got off of an 11 p.m. work shift and had to drive 15 minutes home. I stopped at a gas station and a 30 to 35-year-old African-American male said he was stranded and needed a car ride back to his house to get money. I knew the story sounded weird, but I said, "Hey, what the hell? Let's help this guy out." I had half a joint left and sparked it up and offered him some. He took a hit with me and we continued on our way. As we were driving, he was really fidgety and anxious. He kept rubbing his leg back and forth and rubbing the back of his head as if he was waiting for something. I thought to myself, God damn it, this guy is going to rob me. My son was a few months old at the time, and his rattle was rattling in his empty car seat in the back. I told the guy about it and talked a little about my son. The dude was making me nervous by his body language. I told myself I'd flip the truck over before he'd steal my shit. I had my seatbelt on and he didn't. I ended up taking the guy to this neighborhood and he was looking at all these houses. I kept asking if that's the one or not because the dude had me on high alert at this point. Just a weird situation. Anyway, he asked me for some money, so I gave him $10. I'm pretty sure he wanted to rob me by his behavior in the car. I'd like to think between smoking him out, my son's rattle-making noises, and me giving him $10, he changed his mind. I still remember his face and looked for him on the news or newspaper. Never again will I give a stranger a ride home. My friend and I were pulling onto the highway yesterday when suddenly a Mexican-looking kid waved us down and ran up to our window. He was carrying a suitcase, the big ones like we take on international vacations, and it seemed as if he had been walking for some time. Judging from his appearance, I figured he was probably 20 to 21 years old. He asked us if he could get a ride to Greyhound. We both looked at each other and understood that he was saying Greyhound. And the only Greyhound bus stop in town was at this gas station a few miles down the road. It was cold and windy out and we had some spare time, so we told him to jump in. Initially, thoughts run through your head and you wonder, I wonder what's in that suitcase. Is he going to put a knife to my neck from behind the seat? Kilos of coke from Mexico because this is South Texas? A chopped up body? But as we began to drive, I saw the sigh of relief through the rearview mirror and realized this kid is just happy for a ride. When we got to the gas station, my friend walked in and double-checked everything to make sure it was the right spot. But to our surprise, the final bus for Houston left for the day. The next bus at 6 p.m. was in a town 25 miles over. We tried explaining this to him. I should have paid more attention in the Spanish I am the second. They forced us to take in high school. The only words I can really say are sí and comprende. My friend and I said, let's drop him off, and turned to him and said, listen, we are going to eat first, making hand gestures showing spoons entering mouth, and we will drop you off after, but homeboy was still clueless and kept nodding. We already ordered Chinese food and began driving in that direction, and when we got there, he got out of the car and went to the trunk as if the Chinese restaurant was the bus stop. We tell him to come in and eat something first, leave the suitcase in the car. He is still clueless. When we go in, our food was already ready. We decided to eat there so he could eat as well. When the hostess came over, she looked Spanish. So I asked her, I was like, hey, listen, We picked this guy up from the street. He missed his bus. And the next one is 25 miles over. Can you tell him that after we are done eating, we will drop him off? It's, okay, no problems. And she was kind of taken by it and laughed. Translated it to the guy, and for the next 10 minutes, all he kept saying was, thank you. After we jumped into the car, I turned to him in the back and was like, listen, it's 25 miles. I'm rolling a spliff. Do you smoke? He still had no clue, but when we sparked it up and passed it his way, he smoked it like a champ. He had very broken English, but said he was from Ecuador and he was in America looking for a job to make money for his family back home. Like I said, he was probably 20 to 21 years old. Shortly after, we arrived at our destination and said farewell. Dropped him off at some store where he would have to sit on a bench outside for the next hour. But I did my best. I hope he made it to wherever he had to go. My man got picked up, fed sweet and sour chicken, smoked a spliff, and got a ride to a location 30 minutes away. I hope he will do the same for someone else one day. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload.